Hey, welcome back to Zombie Tactics. Today I've got a certain thing sticking in my craw and I've just got to get it off my chest. There's a statement I'm hearing people make a lot lately and it goes along these lines. Let me make sure I get my nose up in the air to the right degree to get it right. You know, it's easier to buy a handgun in the United States than it is to buy cold medicine. Or you'll hear people say something like that. It's easier to buy a rifle, it's easier to buy a assault weapon than it is to buy cold medicine. Or you'll hear it the other way around. It's harder to buy cold medicine than it is to get one of those particular kinds of firearms. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that I think they say that because they know that people that aren't familiar with firearms are going to hear that. And they're going to kind of take it at face value and say, wow, it's harder to get cold medicine than it is to get a gun. We got to do something about that. We got to get some stricter regulations or something. And, you know, that just ain't right. And they're playing games with language and they're playing games with the meanings of things. And I'm going to show you how this works. Right off the bat, on the face of it, the idea that it's harder to get cold medicine in the United States than it is to get a handgun or a rifle is ridiculous. Within walking distance of my house, there's a Walgreens pharmacy. There's an AM/PM mini market. There's a Walmart with a pharmacy attached to it. There's a Safeway drugstore. There's 3 or 4 gas stations that have mini markets, all of which I could walk into, put some money down, and walk out with cold medicine with nothing preventing me from doing it. Absolutely nothing. And that's because the vast majority of the cold medicine that's sold in the United States is exactly that way. I happened to go to Target today on an errand with my daughter, and here's a picture of the aisle of different cold medicines. And by the way, there's another aisle that's that long with nothing but cold medicine, and I'll show you some pictures here, because not only can you buy cold medicine, you can buy all kinds of different cold medicine, none of which anybody is going to expect you to do anything about except grab it off the shelf there, take it up to the counter, and pay for it. And that's all the trouble you're going to have. It doesn't matter whether you're a convicted felon, you've got a bunch of misdemeanors, you were discharged from the military dishonorably, you have a restraining order or had one against you, you've ever had an incident of, you know, violence in public or drunkenness in public or whatever. It doesn't matter. You can just plain buy the stuff and walk out the door with it. I don't know any gun store in America where you could walk in the gun store, throw some money down, grab the gun and go, and that's all there is going to be to it. There's going to be a lot more to it, starting with the fact that it's going to be harder to find a gun store than it is to find an AM/PM mini market in the first place. But, see, the point that they're making here is that there is a certain kind of cough medicine that contains something called pseudoephedrine, which in kind of drug slang, street slang, among methamphetamine dealers, it's called pseudo. And the reason why this particular cough medicine is a little bit more tightly restricted and you got to go through a little bit of trouble, very little trouble to get this, is because it contains pseudoephedrine. And pseudoephedrine is an ingredient that's used in the recipe for making crystal meth, which is a big problem. Now, almost everywhere in the country, it's still an over-the-counter thing. They're going to keep it behind the counter, but you walk up to the counter, you say, I want some Sudafed, they hand it to you, and you're going to give them some information, and you're going to walk out the door with it after paying for it. Again, there's not going to be any kind of background check or anything like that. But to be fair to the question, there are a couple places, and I think Oregon and Mississippi, if I get this right, it's wrong. It's either Oregon and Mississippi, maybe it's Missouri, where you have to have a doctor's prescription to get pseudoephedrine. So you can say, well, whoa, wait a minute, I don't have to get a doctor's prescription to buy a firearm. So at least in those places, it is harder to get that particular cold medicine than it would be to buy a firearm of any kind. So that's where they kind of get by with saying that statement, and if you press them on it, they'll say they weren't lying, they were telling the truth. But honestly, in my mind, that's still BS, because there are all kinds of particular firearms that I have to get permission from the federal government and pay a $200 stamp, and I've got to go to local law enforcement and have them sign off and say I'm a good guy and I get to have this, and there's all kinds of restrictions upon that. So to say on one hand I got to get a doctor's prescription in a few places in the United States to get pseudoephedrine, and that means it's harder to get cough medicine than to get a handgun, that doesn't make sense, because in other parts of the country it's a lot more trouble, and it actually requires the permission of the federal government and paying a special tax in order to get a particular kind of NFA firearm. So there, you know, it's a lot more trouble to get that federal permission than it is to get that doctor's permission. So again, even there, that's complete BS. It's harder to get the firearm, the special firearm, than it is to get the special cough medicine. And that's the worst case scenario. almost anywhere in the United States, I can walk into a drugstore, I walk up to the counter, I say, give me some pseudoephedrine. They say, okay, let me see some picture ID. There's my driver's license, my student ID, anything. And I want your name, your address, and your phone number, and we're going to keep a record of that. So that if you are a meth dealer, the cops could come along later, they can research the local pharmacies, see who's buying up a bunch of Sudafed, and that will aid them in prosecution. But that's it. There's nothing else to it. You're going to walk in, and 5 minutes later, you're going to walk out with some Sudafed, if that's what you want. On the other hand, buying any firearm in the United States of America requires you walk in the store, after you pick out the gun you want, you're going to have to fill out a Form 4473. It's a long, two-page form. It's front and back. And you're going to have to put your name, your address, your phone number, all of that good stuff. There's a place for your social security number. It's optional, but they'll be very clear with you that if you don't put it down there, there's going to be a delay. And that delay might be days because they could get your name mixed up with somebody else, and that will delay them approving, in other words, getting federal approval for you to buy a firearm, something you don't need to buy any kind of cough medicine. Thank you very much. And that form also has things on there like, have you ever been discharged dishonorably from the military? Have you ever had a restraining order against you? Have you ever had any kind of a misdemeanor, certain misdemeanors? Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Have you ever renounced your U.S. citizenship? Are you an illegal alien? It goes on and on and on and on. And that information is going to be submitted to a national, in other words, a federal check system where they're going to check your background and all the information you've given there and make sure that you're someone who has permission from the government to buy this firearm. Now, depending upon where you live, that process might take, I don't know, 15 minutes, certainly longer than it would take to give your ID to the person and buy the Sudafed, but that's still longer and it's still more hassle, and you got to give all kinds of information to the federal government in order to buy a firearm. And in many parts of the country, you're going to be waiting 3 days, 10 days, or more to get that form approved, to get that check done before you can pick up your gun. I don't know anywhere in the United States where somebody's going to ask you to wait 10 days to pick up your cough medicine. It's ridiculous on its face when people make this statement that it's easier to get a gun in the United States than it is cough medicine. Frankly, they're being dishonest with you. They're being disingenuous. Frankly, it's BS, and you need to kind of throw it back in their face. That's Zombie Tactics for today. We'll see you next time. As always, keep your powder dry and keep aiming for the head. Bye-bye.